Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk. And I'd just like to acknowledge that I speak from Aboriginal land, the land of the Cammeraygal people, and this is land that has never been ceded. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, ever mindful that this was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginals who may be with us. So tonight's topic, last time we did this a couple of weeks ago, I started on the topic of core issues in spiritual and personal growth. And it's quite a big topic, so I'm going to continue that topic tonight. And I won't even finish it tonight, as a matter of fact. And I do think of these sessions as interactive. So please, 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 feel free to interrupt and so that we can have a conversational session. And that'll be good. Okay. So tonight I'm primarily going to deal with one very big core issue. And this is called neglecting our own needs. And disowning and neglecting my own needs is directly related to, I think, the one I last spoke of the last time we did the session, which is about being over-responsible. And being over-responsible is when I tend to take responsibility for things that aren't actually my responsibility. And it can happen very often in dysfunctional families where one of the children, maybe the oldest child or the second oldest child, but one of the children will become the little parent to the other kids, to the other siblings. And if a parent is absent or has some kind of issue and is not able to function as they should in the family, then one of the children will take up the slack and become over-responsible. And becoming over-responsible is a way of gaining a sense of being powerful in a situation in which I am actually powerless. And it is a kind of phony feeling of control, or that I'm in charge, you know. And when a child takes on over-responsibility, it doesn't stop. The problem is, you know, they grow up, they leave the family, they become independent, and possibly far too early, and they leave, you know, the context or the situation in which they developed this core issue. But by that time, it's just become automatic behaviour. And so this is a person who can start, maybe it solved some of the childhood problems, but to go through life solving one's problems in this way will lead to an increasing sense of emptiness and possibly burnout and meaninglessness and unfulfillment. And so this, what I'm talking about tonight is neglecting our own needs, and it is really directly related to being over-responsible. Only children can also suffer from this. And the psychologist Abraham Maslow, he was the humanist, he compiled a hierarchy of human needs, which I think are quite well known, and these are commonly recognised as being essential to human development. But as there are several people who have worked on this sort of list of human needs. Miller is another one. But I'm going to draw tonight on a more recent compilation by somebody in America. He's an American psychiatrist by the name of Whitfield, who I actually trained with in the 80s, and I found him to be the most remarkable, extraordinarily compassionate and knowledgeable human being. And so I am actually very influenced by his work in my approach, I must confess. And so the fact is that to reach our full potential, our needs must be met in childhood. Because when they're not, we grow up sort of like a half-coloured in drawing, often feeling confused and even possibly chronically unhappy. And so we would say that the unmet needs of the child become the neuroses and addictions of the adult. And so I guess the point I'm making through talking about core issues is that we will be driven in our lives by the unmet needs of our childhood. And these unmet needs aren't necessarily conscious, but they will be hugely influential in our choice of how we do everything in our life, our choice of partner, our choice, because we create our own lives. So our choices will be heavily influenced by the unmet needs of our childhood, and it won't even be conscious. And so, to me, it is very, very important to understand what these unmet needs of childhood were so that we can address them and gain freedom from choices that we will make in life that aren't necessarily serving our spiritual growth or our personal development, and that aren't taking us into a positive and rewarding, fulfilling pathway in life. We will choose our partner according to those unmet needs. We will often choose a career or a lifestyle. They will affect all of our choices. And so at the sort of very basic level of needs, we have survival, safety, and security. So a newborn is a little bundle of needs, requiring someone who is available 24/7 to provide for its survival. Safety and security are the basis of survival, but a baby needs to be held and touched, or they won't thrive. Now, I actually can't hear myself. So I'm just hoping that all of you can hear me.
Yeah, perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can.
And I can hear you too perfectly. So, as I was saying, a newborn comes into this world, a little bundle of needs, requiring someone who is available pretty much 24/7 to provide for its survival. So safety and protection and security are the basis of survival. But a baby has many more needs than that, obviously. And I'm going to go through these pretty much in order of importance. Obviously, physical nourishment is vital. That's part of a survival need. But beyond food, a baby needs to be touched. Babies need to be held or they won't thrive. And even though they may get good nourishment in terms of food and protection, they need to be held by a loving, warm, soft, caring person who may be the mother or the father or the primary caregiver, whoever that may be. So they need to be held. They need heart-to-heart contact, or they simply won't thrive. And so a lot of laboratory experiments have been done around this. And in one experiment, I can think of quite a few, but in one, rabbits fed an arteriosclerosis-inducing diet. Arteriosclerosis is hardening of the arteries. So a number of rabbits were fed this diet that induced arteriosclerosis, and half the group of rabbits were held and petted by the lab workers, whereas the other half, or the control group, were not. And the little rabbits who got the petting and attention from the workers did not develop arteriosclerosis, whereas the rabbits who were not held and petted did get arteriosclerosis. And it appears that to feel connected and cared for, we need to be touched and held and hugged. Babies need heart-to-heart and skin-to-skin contact for their emotional development. And older kids need hugs every day, as well as plenty of positive attention. So here we are, our next need. And attention is like oxygen. If a child is not getting plenty of oxygen, then, we will breathe monoxide. We will breathe carbon dioxide. Because the need is to breathe, and attention is like needing it. Getting attention is like getting oxygen. And so if a child is not getting positive attention, then their need for attention is so great that they'll find ways of getting attention which will be negative and actually work very well in terms of getting attention. So it could be stealing, could be, throwing rocks through car windows or whatever, could be some form of petty crime, using drugs, using alcohol, acting out in ways that just lost my mouse for a moment. Sorry about that. So acting out in ways that may result in a policeman knocking on the door. Now that brings attention. And so we see that the need for attention must be met, and one way or another it will be, because if children can't get their needs met in a healthy way, then they will get them met any way they can, and which could be very unhealthy and often is. And so the next need is for attachment. Now, during childbirth, the hormone that we call oxytocin floods the bloodstream of both the mother and the child. Oxytocin is commonly dubbed the bonding hormone or the love hormone. And what it does is ensure a love affair between mother and infant is established. And so without a secure, warm, soft, loving and dependable attachment figure, to meet the baby's needs, the child will forever lack the template for healthy, loving relationships and much, much more through life. And what happens in the first 2 years of a baby's life is very, very important. If a baby can't form a secure attachment in the first 2 years of its life, it will be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to remedy. Now, understanding our attachment needs is a whole other subject, so I'm not going to go into it right at the moment. I know I actually have spoken about it before, but attachment is incredibly important for little ones. And, when people's attachment needs aren't met in a healthy way at the right time, which is in infancy and childhood, when we get past that age, past that time, it's much harder to meet them, through therapy and through a more psychological approach. It can be done. It certainly can be done. But, we have our needs come at a certain age, which is the ideal age for us to get those needs met, and trying to get them met later on in life tends to be difficult. What else can I say? Okay. So, mirroring and echoing. Now, this is provided first by the primary caregiver, usually, obviously, the mother, who reacts non-verbally to her baby through facial expression, posture, body language, sounds, and other movements, so that baby realises it's understood. And this validates little ones as a feeling and thinking being. When a mother or primary carer has not had their attachment or other needs met themselves, they're going to be poorly placed. If they haven't had any intervention, they will be poorly placed to meet these needs in their own children. And however, a loving grandparent or relative or other can also provide these needs for a child. And as long as the child has plenty of contact with that person, that can make up for a hell of a lot. And I'm sure you've all heard that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. And it's great because, the more extended family systems, the more people around a child when they're growing up, the more likely, if the parents are kind of busy working or whatever, that there'll be somebody there or more than one person there who is able to love that child in the way the child needs and to meet the child's needs. And so the next one that I'm going to talk about is guidance. And this can include verbal and non-verbal modelling and teaching appropriate, healthy social skills, which may include advising, prompting, assisting, telling and reading stories to the children that help them develop moral reasoning, and also the use of repetition in teaching children. They need to hear things lots of times, usually before they actually learn. And so taking time with children is very important so that they learn how to get their own needs met as they grow into independent adolescents and young adults. And one of the most powerful, probably the most powerful way that a child learns is that it watches its parents or its caregivers and learns to get its needs met by watching how the parents get their needs met, because they do their little copy thing. And so they will copy the behaviour of their parents and those around them. So it is, that kind of pedagogy, that parenting pedagogy is very, very powerful. And so there are the need to be dependent. Children are dependent, and they need to be dependent as children. And, there are situations, I remember in Australia in the post-World War II time when we had a lot of migration to Australia from Europe, from war-torn countries in Europe, and where a lot of people migrated here who had experienced a lot of deprivation due to war and depression and, harsh conditions in Europe, not enough food and all that sort of thing, lack of education and so on. And so they migrated here, and bringing with them probably a fair amount of post-traumatic stress from the war, came here, married, had families, and their kids would be in a position of having to translate for their parents who maybe couldn't learn English or was too hard or whatever. Or, you know, a lot of them started small businesses, shops, greengrocer shops, some kind of retail business, whatever the business. And they worked so hard. And often the children were then pulled into the business and started working when they were very, very young. And so when that sort of thing happened, it's actually really damaging to kids to start, you know, to be child labour, because they need to have a childhood, they need to be carefree and, you know, experience the freedom of being a child and being taken care of by their parents, not having to assume lots of responsibility too early in life. So dependency needs. Then we've got listening, participating, and accepting. So being listened to, being heard and understood by another, beginning with our caregivers or our parents, of course, nourishes many other needs on the hierarchy. We need to be taken seriously, accepted, and to have our own authentic self validated. So having our feelings respected, validated, and at the very least tolerated allows us the freedom to be who we really are. Kids also need their carers, parents, to participate in games with them, to participate in activities and their interests with them, rather than just kind of being left to their own devices. Really, really important stuff. And so the next need is the opportunity to grieve our losses and grow. And so life necessarily involves experiencing loss, regardless of whether the loss is real or threatened. We still have a need to grieve it. Pain and suffering are a part of loss, and we need to be able to feel and embrace it fully. And I mean this throughout life, but particularly in childhood. So important. We need to have our grief validated, and kids need someone who can hold them emotionally and physically so that they can grieve. They need help to grieve. They need to be supported in their grief. When we grieve our losses to completion, then we will naturally grow. But when we avoid grief or we're unable to grieve, there is inner contraction. And I do mean contraction. Grief takes us right out of our comfort zone and deeply, deeply into our painful feelings. And so all we have to do, if we can just flow with the grief, all we have to do is feel it. And ultimately, we will be liberated. Now, I've spoken about grief before in quite a lot of detail, so I won't go into all that detail now. And so the next need is for support. And the word implies that whatever is offered in the name of support will not interfere with, but will promote the growth of the receiver. Unrequested support or intervention given in a non-crisis situation, it can really be fixing or rescuing. And it can be a very fine line between them. And so support is a very different thing between fixing and rescuing. Fixing and rescuing tends to be unrequested. If someone asks for support, and it should be requested, unless it's a crisis situation. In a crisis situation, then we jump in. And so the next is loyalty and trust. So being supportive requires loyalty and trust between the giver and receiver. To betray the true self of another person will cause serious damage to the relationship. And in order to grow, trust must be reciprocal. So in a relationship, we should feel trusted and we should be able to trust the other person. So it should be completely mutual. And, these are needs. These are human needs. And so the next one is accomplishment. So achievement or accomplishment enables a feeling of empowerment and mastery. No matter how small the achievement may be, completing a task, making a contribution, succeeding, all bring a sense of fulfillment, satisfaction, and this fulfillment and satisfaction fill the task with meaning. However, I want to distinguish here that becoming an overachiever in a career area, but being unable to form intimate relationships, tends to be the result of a dysfunctional upbringing. Some people, in order to, empower themselves, they're really good at their job, but the rest of their life they're not so good at. So they put all their energy into professional achievement. And that's just one aspect of life. And they'll put all their eggs in that basket, and all their energy and all their ego identity will get thrown in that basket. And if something happens, then they're going to be having a severe identity crisis and a tremendous sense of loss. And so accomplishment, ideally, is something that's across life. That we don't, neglect our relationships and friendships and family and so on, our loved ones, because we're so busy overachieving at work or at study or whatever. It's, what we get is a life out of balance and a person really out of balance. And so wholeness does not come from that. Achieving a sense of wholeness means shifting my understanding of what truly meaningful achievement really is, and focusing my attention where the work is really needed. You know, if I'm not having good relationships and experiencing some lovely intimate relationships in my life, our deepest drive is for intimacy. Our deepest drive is not to achieve at work. Our deepest drive is to achieve intimacy in our relationships. And it's very, very important. It's kind of such a foundational need. Okay, so the next is altering consciousness and having fun and enjoyment. So we humans actually have an identified biological need to alter our consciousness, although I have to say not with substances, but with daydreaming, with laughing. Maybe it's playing sport or concentrating on a project that I'm involved with, sleeping, going to the movies, going to the theatre, going to Luna Park, going to parties, socialising. You know, having fun is really important. And it really does help us to change our consciousness. It's important that we're not in the same consciousness all the time. And this probably is not something that you give a lot of thought to. But it is really important. We have a real biological need to alter our consciousness. We can do it through meditation. We can do it through mindfulness. We can do it by going for a lovely walk, by connecting with nature, going to the beach, having a swim. You know, there are so many ways we can alter our consciousness. And many people do without kind of thinking, oh, yes, I'm altering my consciousness now. But there is a great need to do it. Having fun is really important. Kids need fun and excitement in their lives. You know, it's very important for their development. And when we grow up, it's really important too for us to have fun and some excitement. And now I'm going to talk about a need that has not had a whole lot of attention. I think it gets a lot more attention today than it ever has before. And so this is sexuality. Now, it's part of being human because we are a soul in a body. And whilst the gender politics of today are complex and can be quite loaded, being comfortable and accepting of one's sexuality, regardless of sexual identity or preference, is actually a much bigger picture than gender alone. And it kind of gets tied into our sense of wholeness. And so, you know, we are embodied beings. We are embodied energy, life force. And so, you know, in embracing our whole being, which I think is terribly important. Okay, maybe it's great for me to think I'm a soul, but I also have a body, and I have to live in this body and with this body and take care of it. And because whatever's going on inside me, in my mind, will be reflected in my body. You know, if I've got a twinge in the body somewhere, it's because there's a twinge inside in the soul. So the next one is, so sexuality is important, and you know, integrating, because we need to integrate, regardless of how we identify or what we prefer or anything else. Even if I've chosen a spiritual pathway in life that, you know, defers the certain physical needs to spiritual needs, there still needs to be integration and acceptance and a sense of wholeness. And so the next need is for freedom. And gosh, this was something I became starkly aware of when I was working with asylum seekers in our notoriously dreadful immigration detention centres here in Australia and on and offshore. When people are deprived of their freedom, it has the most terrible, terrible effect. And so this is a very, very important need. Not only do we need physical and emotional freedom, we need the freedom to be who we are, to take risks, to make our own choices in our life, to explore and be spontaneous, to discover, to act and express ourselves in whatever ways are meaningful for us. And so to take away the freedom of another is to impose the most severe and damaging torture on that person psychologically. I remember working with, I was up on Manus working with, very early one morning, I was doing a group with, doing an art therapy group with a group of people from Afghanistan, the Hazara. Most of them were Hazara. And they'd come from such an oppressed existence in Afghanistan, where the Hazara been largely pushed into the most difficult, rocky, mountainous sort of areas, and trying to eke out a survival in those areas is so difficult because they have to grow food to survive. And because of the topography and the lack of good soil and the amount of, you know, rock and the climate and so on, they spend so much time just trying to get enough to eat. And, you know, young kids are pressed into service of trying to help parents grow food from a very early age. And, you know, I was doing this art therapy group. I remember it was really early on a Saturday morning. And one of these guys, he wrote on his picture, I'd given them the topic of freedom. And one of them wrote on his picture, soon the memory of freedom will fade completely. You know, it was really quite heartbreaking. And, the number of people who would be so broken and say to me, without freedom, life is meaningless. And that's what I saw. So, yes, we need our freedom from political oppression and domestic oppression, etc., etc. We've all born free. We deserve to be free. It's a fundamental human right. And, I talked about spontaneity. So, we have a need to be spontaneous. And I just want to note that spontaneity and impulsivity are really two different things. Impulsivity can have quite damaging consequences. We can really get it wrong when we're impulsive. So it's quite a different thing from spontaneity. And so the next is nurturing. The next need is nurturing. In order to nurture, we must do so appropriately, without ulterior or self-serving motive. And the receiver must be able to let go or surrender in order to be nurtured. And this reciprocity is, funnily enough, quite unusual in human interaction. To surrender, for people to surrender and allow themselves to be nurtured, it takes very, very strong boundaries and trust, a lot of trust. And it takes a very mature person who's in a very good place with themselves to surrender to being nurtured. But nurturing, to give and receive nurture, is actually, it's such a lovely thing. Then the next is unconditional love. And this final need is a difficult concept for some to grasp. And it's kind of a spiritual concept as much as it may appear to be emotional. To give freely without expectation of receiving or gaining anything is unconditional. To give from spiritual love and open-heartedness is higher order love, the no strings, no attachment, pure altruistic kind of love. It's, love can mean many things to many people, but pure love is no strings. It's not needy. It's not coming out of a dependency shortfall. It's completely separate. It's unconditional love. It's clean, it's pure, and it's straight from the heart. And so it's important to realise that life in the 21st century means we will not find one person who is capable of providing all these needs for us, much less someone who delivers it, because there is no such person. And so it's important that we understand. I think it's very important to understand the hierarchy of needs, so that we we can learn to meet our own needs, because we, of all the people I know, I am the most able to provide for my needs. I know what my needs are, and that puts me in a unique position to meet them. And people who choose a spiritual pathway often find that their needs can be met in a higher relationship, in the sense with both our higher self and with a higher power. And so being able to get an understanding of transcending, of sort of transforming our needs, in a sense, so that they, if they are unmet, as we learn to meet our own needs, it empowers us tremendously. And when we can meet our own needs, we can meet the needs of others. And we will have a very, very clear and deep understanding of the needs of others and how we can meet them, the needs of others, in an unconditional and pure way. But we need to understand how to do that for ourselves. And a person who has had the majority of their needs met as a child is going to be very well placed as an adult to meet their own needs and also to meet the needs of others when they have family and so on, or depending on what kind of work they end up doing. People who go into the helping professions, for instance, people like me, are meeting the needs of others. But if you're in the helping profession and you're not meeting your own needs, you will burn out. You will empty yourself. So self always comes first. And being unconditionally loving of ourself is actually very, very important. So it's not that we're just unconditionally loving of others. We have to love ourselves. And when we can do this in an unconditional way, I don't think it's easy, by the way, then we're really able to give without any cost involved to the self. Okay, so that is our hierarchy of needs. And that's something that we can all look at, because, as I said at the beginning, the unmet needs of the child become the neuroses and addictions of the adult. They will shape our lives to a huge degree. Our lives, our relationships, our choices, the path we take in life can be completely driven. Our unmet needs drive us unconsciously, usually. And so becoming aware of them is, to me, very, very, very important. And just excuse me a moment, but I was talking about core issues before. So that completes neglecting our own needs. So I don't know I'm neglecting my own needs if I don't know what they are. And so the next core issue that I want to talk about is having a high tolerance for inappropriate behaviour. And this is a terribly debilitating core issue. If I haven't learned healthy boundaries in my childhood, then I'm going to be highly vulnerable to tolerating inappropriate behaviour, because my boundaries will either be very permeable, so that I let far too much in and I let far too much out of myself, let too much of others in and let too much of myself out inappropriately, or I just build a wall. I become really rigid and I build a wall. And so I don't let myself out and I don't let anything in, the two opposites. But where there's a high tolerance for inappropriate behaviour, the wall, there is no wall and there are no boundaries. And anyone who's grown up in a dysfunctional family is vulnerable. And good boundaries are very much modelled for us by our parents. We sort of learn by osmosis. We learn all these things by osmosis from the people that we grow up with. Our families, our parents are very powerful teachers. And so tolerating inappropriate behaviour really eats away at our enjoyment of life. Because if we're tolerating inappropriate behaviour, it means we're in an unhealthy relationship, a disrespectful, unhealthy relationship. And so we need to understand what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And there's the line. The line is there between what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And so it's about learning what is appropriate touching. We learn that as a kid, hopefully. Other people do not have the right to invade our physical space or our emotional space or our psychological space uninvited. If they're invited, that's different. That's not invasion. That's invitation. However, we need to understand what is appropriate in this sense as well. And to not understand what is appropriate is very, very debilitating and can rob us of our self-esteem and make us feel dissatisfied and disrespected and very disempowered in our life. And so if this is an issue, if this is a core issue, then of course we must first learn what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And then we need to learn how to set boundaries. Boundaries are fundamental to living in a healthy, self-respectful way, having really healthy, positive interactions with other people. And then the next core issue is fear of abandonment. And, you know, this goes way back to our earliest seconds and minutes and moments, hours of life. And trust and distrust will spring from this. As I've said, as we all know, a baby can't do anything for itself except cry. And if a baby's needs, you know, babies cry, and when the caregiver is really tuned in, they know what the tone and the type of the cry, they know what it means. They read it. You know, they're in such telepathic communication with their baby that they can just read it straight away. I've seen mothers do this so often. And so, you know, they'll go and they know exactly what their baby needs, where it needs to be changed or fed or held or played with or picked up or needs a cuddle, whatever. And so when little kids, when they're crying or they're expressing their needs in the only way they can, depending on their development, if there's not someone there to meet their needs, then they're going to feel abandoned. And the more that happens, the deeper that feeling of abandonment will become. And it's like, well, there's nobody there for me. No one's coming to help me. And someone who's experienced this as they grow up will be terrified of being abandoned. And it may not be conscious. Again, it may not be conscious. There are much more unsubtle forms of abandonment. And, you know, I remember working with somebody when I was in the criminal justice system for many years. I was working with somebody who told me that when he was a little boy, a tiny little boy, he had a little brother, and the parents wouldn't let them. He grew up in another country, incidentally, not Australia, but he said the parents would not allow them to go to school, and they were kept very much locked in at home. They didn't have friends and they weren't fed properly. And as soon as he was big enough, he used to, at night, he used to break out of his bedroom. He'd climb out through the window. He used to break in to the kitchen through the kitchen window. He would get food, and then he would go and break in through the window in his brother's bedroom, feed his little brother, feed himself, and then he'd go back into his own bedroom through the window. And when the kids were old enough, but they were still very young, they were put on a plane and sent to Australia without an adult. And they were told, and the airline was told, that someone would be there, a relative would be there to meet them. They were going on holiday. And so off they were sent on a plane with someone from the airline, a stewardess or someone just keeping an eye on them. And then they got off in Australia, wherever they landed, and there was nobody to meet them. These two little kids running around the airport for days, trying to feed themselves, look after themselves, not knowing what to do. And until someone called the authorities, the police came and picked them up. And then they went into a series of foster homes, and ended up in jail, ended up with terrible drug problems. And I said to this guy, that is probably the worst abandonment story I've ever heard. It's just extraordinary to imagine that anyone could do that to their kids. But, fear of abandonment, this is these situations that set up a fear of abandonment are very real. And, children are naturally feel very powerless. They are. And so growing up with a fear of abandonment is terribly debilitating. And, of course, it plays out in all relationships and situations, and can result in, very insecure, very, very insecure attachment, and, a person who is terrified of being abandoned will, if they think they've got a partner and they think their partner's going to abandon them down the line, they will find someone else and then abandon the partner, then call the relationship off, because they're so terrified of being abandoned by that person. And that can be a serial behaviour. So fear of abandonment will play out. And so the next one is difficulty dealing with conflict and resolving conflict. Now, this is actually quite a big topic, which probably deserves a session all on its own. So I'm just going to be very, very brief tonight, and we'll talk about it at another time. And it is a core issue generally for people in recovery from addictions and substances. And when people who've grown up in conflictual environments, they simply won't have learned usually how to deal with conflict, or they will have learned very inappropriate ways, which may be a common way that people avoid conflict, is that they avoid it, they withdraw from it, they run away from it and freeze. They hide, they freeze, they disengage completely. Whereas someone else may, come in throwing punches at the slightest hint of conflict and, lose it quite easily. And so these are very, very ineffective ways. We need to learn to deal with conflict. It is part of life. It is reality. And we need to learn how to effectively move against another person. We learn how to move towards people. We learn how to move away from people. But often it's learning how to move against another is something that many people do not learn, and yet it is important to be able to do that. It's important to be able to do that because it's about getting our needs met. We have to be able to resolve conflict. No one's ever going to get through life, never having conflict with others or with situations. It's just not realistic. So we do have to learn how to deal with it. I'm not going to go into the how tonight, but another time I can do that. And I'll be quite happy to do that. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet now and invite you to ask questions. So, do we have any questions?
Oh, Jude, I wanted to ask your view on getting your needs met in a world where we now need a minister for loneliness, I heard yesterday.
I know. Yeah, that came up just after the election. I laughed.
Oops, not getting a good connection.
Can you hear me, Barbara?
I could hear you.
I'm having a few issues with connection tonight. I'm sorry about that. I'm not in New South Wales. I'm in Queensland, so I don't know if it's got something to do with it. But I was just saying, when you hear about needs and getting needs met in a world that's increasingly incapable of meeting others' needs, they're not able to be present to the other. We're in the age of narcissism, every person for themselves. So and I heard this yesterday somewhere that in England now they have a minister for loneliness because it's now become an epidemic where people can't reach out to others. They don't feel they can. It's not that not necessarily a not willingness to trust or to affiliate, to be in relationship. It is that somehow it's like you can't quite reach that person and that person's not reaching you. It's almost like you're just sliding doors, going different. There's not a synchronicity. And we're losing that increasingly. And the younger generations are coming up with addictions to the virtual world of relationship and unable increasingly to form meaningful, warm, affiliated relationships. And there's really quite, I suppose, an alarm now being raised as to what does this mean for the future of mental well-being, spiritual well-being, even how we are as community and therefore society. And where are we going? We're going to be an age of trauma, and the trauma will be the trauma of loneliness, of no one being there ever to reach people at their deepest needs. So I don't know what you make of that. And does that mean that the spiritual direction is really the only one we've got to grow, and then come back from that to try to restore or to rebuild relationship as it's meant to be?
Well, you know, what I'm mindful of is that with lockdown, COVID lockdown, it really changed. I know a lot of people suffered, you know, from isolation and loneliness and so on, but a lot of people also reached out to one another and had, I think, far more discovered a new intimacy in their friendships and close relationships. I know that I did, because, you know, everything slowed down. It was lovely. I mean, I actually loved the lockdowns. I thought it was great. But I think the best thing for relationships, and I'm generalising here, is for the internet to collapse. And it's all this screen thing. I mean, Barbara, you would know, being the generation you are, and I certainly do, because you would, like me, have grown up without the internet and without all these electronic devices that, you know, you get on a train or a bus or whatever, people are just utterly fixated on this little thing, this device. And, you know, what are they doing? Oh, they're going through Facebook, or they're doing their texts or whatever. And they're not reading books. You know, reading fiction, reading books is very, very important. Teaches us how to problem solve. Reading fiction. People who, you know, get very academic and stop reading fiction because they're always reading professional or academic papers, lose their problem, you know, their problem-solving skills get affected, according to research I've read. And so I think that, you know, when the whole screen life disappears, people will actually reconnect. And I think I do think it will happen. I think the internet is under threat. And I think it's the best thing that could possibly happen. I look forward to it. And I think it, you know, because people are having relationships when they live next door to each other, or even live under the same roof, you know, they're texting each other and communicating through electronic devices rather than going and talking directly to one another. And this extraordinary reliance on social media and electronic gadgets, it's changed the way we relate, it's changed the way we live, it's changed how people relate to themselves, you know. As you observed, you know, this is the age of narcissism. And so the way of life, the way that we interact has changed so much because of all this media that we all have. I've seen it, you know, I've seen such a big change in my lifetime with this. And it's no surprise to me that loneliness has become a problem. Because also, you know, so many people are living separately, living alone now, where that used to not happen. But it's a big feature of the way we live now. And And I think I do think we're in for a big changes ahead, where community, people, we need to live in community. We need our communities. People used to live in their villages, and before the Industrial Revolution, there was such a great sense of community that people had living in agrarian society and so on, with pre-industrialisation. And I think so much has been lost with industrialisation, so-called progress. And now with all these electronic devices and internet and social media, and I know there are great benefits from it, but I don't think human interaction has benefited particularly from it. When I was young, we used to meet, our social thing started at school with, church socials on Friday and Saturday nights. We'd go to a dance at the church and, and meet guys, and nowadays people are meeting online, and that's created a culture, a very strange culture where, I have adults saying to me that, they will start meeting someone online and arrange to meet them and just not go. And so I think it's created a lot of disrespect and disappointment. It's just really changing the structure of human relationships. So there are some of my thoughts, Barbara. Does anybody else have anything you'd like to add to this discussion?
Thanks, Jude.
Okay.
Hi, Judy. My name is Suman, and hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
This is just my second session. I'm just loving the talk. So nicely explained, Jude. It's really, really lovely.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm so happy that for the first time I'm hearing this is such a positive comment that I love the lockdown. You said I felt, oh wow, such a positive about lockdown. Someone said. Yeah, but yeah, it has its good and bad, both like about the technology. I just want to add something. I think now everything is open, and now we are able to see the after effect of these technologies. Everyone is still sticking to their Facebook and only social media, and now we are into that habit now. We are continuing even after lockdown is finished. We are now thinking that is our comfort zone. We are just sitting in technology and started to live, on your own. Like nobody want to now live with one another. Like everyone is in a comfortably living their own apartment. Like the isolation told you to live 1.5 meter distance, but now people are now in the comfort zone. They are wanting to live up in a separate own room. Like they don't want to even come out.
Yeah.
Even after the lockdown is finished, that's one of the bad effects. However, I feel little grateful to technology. I think because of technology, I could survive this lockdown. Otherwise, I would have gone literally mad. I feel having this Zoom meeting, having this work from home, I think we have learned a lot about technology during this lockdown. If this wouldn't have arisen, we wouldn't have gone to learn so many things about Zoom meeting or Skype or even doing some even my keyboard lesson I started doing online, or even my Zumba lesson, physical fitness also started doing on Zoom. Like I wouldn't have learned doing these things. So in a way I think I'm grateful to technology. that I'm able to survive this lockdown because of technology. Otherwise, we would go in a mental hospital, I feel. So both the sense it is good and bad. Like yeah, that's what I just wanted to add. But I learned to read the books more in the lockdown. I had so many books collections from BK Center, like from our Fiduk Center. They were just sitting in my cupboard. Like I just read the title of the book and I purchase it and I keep it there. But this lockdown has taught me literally take the book to the park along with your coffee cup and read at least one page. That made me really feel good. So two good habits during the technology. I'm very positive like you about the. I love the technology. I love the lockdown in some way. Only I didn't like is the flights were not there to go to India. I wanted to go and see. My mom was very sick. That is what made me really sad. But other than that, I love the lockdown. I'm on the same boat as you. I love like that way. I could be really focusing more on me. Little got introverted rather than going every time out for the kitty party, going to BK session, going to, always out there. Rather than that, I started reading books, which is good. So I just felt it has both good and bad effects of technology and lockdown. Thank you. That's from me. I just wanted to say.
No, thank you for sharing. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to share anything? Well, in that case, we will have a meditation. And so I'll just speak some words. I won't play music because it distorts so much on Zoom. But I allow my thoughts to settle. And I bring my attention within. Breathing deeply. Into the innermost part of my being. And following the sensation of the breath as it moves in and as it moves out. I draw my energy inside. Into that safe, deep place within. Letting go of the external. And just allowing myself to sink into the subtle. As I let go. more and more. And I sink into the stillness and peace within. Just allowing myself to be. In the river, in the flow. Filling myself with peace. Feeling the love well up. Into my heart. And feeling the lightness of being. And the spaciousness of just being who I truly am. And I fill myself with light. And power. Om Shanti.